Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, December 29th, 2022. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, says that Ukraine has helped the West find itself. So, this was during an address that he gave to Ukraine's parliament on Wednesday, sort of an end of the year address. And he said that in 10 months of the war, his country has helped the West find itself again and provided a historic opportunity. So Zelensky said, quote, in 10 months of this year, we helped everyone. We helped the West find itself again, return to the global arena, and feel how much the West prevails. No one in the West is afraid of Russia anymore and will never be, end quote. So he also said that Ukraine helped Europe, in all sorts of ways. And he pointed out that some countries that were traditionally more neutral are reconsidering the policy, including Sweden, which is trying to join NATO now. And he said that they helped Europe and most of the world feel now that being neutral is immoral, which is how he put it. So he's saying Ukraine helped the world realize that. He also said that the country of Ukraine has given each of its partners a historic opportunity to be a winner, against Russia. And that was a big message in this speech, was that he vowed that Ukraine is going to win this war. And he also said that Ukraine is going to still receive more aid and weapons from the West and other countries. But he said that Ukraine's also going to step up its own weapons production and that its military industrial complex would become one of the best in the world. That was the term that he used. And this is the English language translation that was on his website, his office's website. So he said, quote, Ukraine and the Ukrainian military industrial complex was and will be one of the most powerful in Europe and the world. I am sure of that, end quote. So Ukraine's Western supporters are also hoping to see a strong Ukrainian military industrial complex. Politico reported back in October that NATO has a 10-year plan to help boost Ukraine's military and arms industry. They want to help out with weapons production inside Ukraine to make Kiev fully interoperable with NATO. And this really demonstrates the West's long-term plans that they have for supporting Ukraine and supporting this military. Now, Zelensky made this speech not long after he visited Washington, D.C., where he addressed Congress. And of course, he asked for more aid. So far, Congress has authorized about $112 billion in spending on the war in Ukraine, and more is expected to be approved in the future. So that $45 billion that was included in that huge omnibus bill, President Biden still hasn't signed that into law, so it hasn't come into effect yet. But that's going to happen sometime soon. But it's not like he's not going to sign it. And then the way it works is that once they approve that 45 billion, then they start using that money. So when you see, headlines that say, oh, the US announces a new $1 billion weapons package for Ukraine, that's not new funds. They're using these funds that have been authorized to send that. So the total right now is about 113 billion that's been approved. They're going to spend that over the next few months. And if they spend it at the same rate, they're going to be looking for more probably around April or May. 45 billion, they're not planning for it to last very long. So who knows what number we're going to get up to when this is all said and done. But the next one here. So you have Ukraine promising that they're going to win and their terms are to kick Russia out of all the territory that they've captured. But here we have the Kremlin saying that any peace plan in Ukraine must include the annexed regions joining Russia. So this was Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, He said this on Wednesday. He said, quote, "There can be no peace plan for Ukraine that does not take into account today's realities regarding Russian territory with the entry of 4 regions into Russia. Plans that do not take these realities into account cannot be peaceful," end quote. So Russia formally annexed the territory that it controls in Kherson, Zaporizhia, and the breakaway Donbass republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. And this was after holding referendums that, of course, Ukraine and the U.S. denounced as shams. And it's not clear because Russia doesn't control all of these oblasts. They control virtually all of Luhansk. They've lost a very small portion of that oblast. Donetsk, more than half, but they don't control all these territories. So, and it's not really clear if they're saying that they're annexing the areas that they control. Because right now, what they do have is what you would call, I guess, a land bridge from mainland Russia to Crimea by controlling these territories. So, who knows what they would be happy with, but really, this shows how far apart Russia and Ukraine are, as Zelensky has been pushing this, peace plan that it involves Russia withdrawing from all this territory, including Crimea. They're still saying that they're going to retake Crimea, which Russia has controlled since 2014. And for their part, though, while Russia is saying this, and they've said this before, they say that they're open to talks. They haven't really set preconditions to talks. They said they're open to talks with Ukraine and its Western backers. Well, on the other hand, Ukraine has pretty unrealistic demands as preconditions to even open a dialogue with Russia. Yesterday, earlier this week, as I went over, Dmytro Kuleba, the Ukrainian foreign minister, he said that talks could only happen after Russia faces war crimes tribunals. So after Russia pulls out and then they go on trial for alleged war crimes in Ukraine, then they'll have peace talks. I mean, that's just a completely unrealistic demand, just a total non-starter. And he also said that Ukraine is hoping for a peace summit that would be hosted by the UN, but he doesn't want Russia to attend. And, again, I feel like I've been going over this a lot, making this point a lot, but, the only way that Ukraine's going to be moved to the negotiating table right at this point is if the U.S. pressures them to and leverages aid. But, of course, we don't see that happening. So the war will go on. Those peace talks that happened much earlier in the war that the U.S. and NATO discouraged seem to be the only real shot that we had since Russia invaded in February for the two sides to come to a settlement. But that seems like a very long time ago now. All right, the next article here is Zelensky. He met with the CEO of Blackrock, Larry Fink, and Blackrock is this, the huge U.S. investment management company. They held a video meeting on Wednesday, and they agreed to coordinate on the reconstruction of Ukraine. So Zelensky's office said that he and Fink, quote, agreed to focus in the near term on coordinating the efforts of all potential investors and participants in the reconstruction of our country, channeling investment into the most relevant and impactful sectors of the Ukrainian economy, end quote. So Ukraine's reconstruction has a huge price tag on it. The World Bank estimated this month that it could cost between 500 and 600 billion euros, which right now is about $525 billion US dollars to $630 billion. So that's a lot of money. And that number could rise as the war drags on. Back in June, their estimate was much lower. They said it would cost about 350 billion euros. Now, Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have put the price tag much higher. They said Ukraine's what they call recovery plan would cost about 750 billion. So this is kind of another aspect of, we're always talking about the arms makers, the weapons makers, but the financial world and BlackRock and investment companies like that, they stand to gain a lot on lending money on the reconstruction and things like that. So again, and as the war keeps going, I mean, Ukraine's energy infrastructure is just getting destroyed, and there's just going to be so much money sunk into repairing it as the war is going on, but then it's going to get bombed again. So it's just a ton of money here. And Zelensky mentioned in a video address, he discussed his meeting with Fink, and he also said that he's going to be attending the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, Switzerland. That's going to be held in January. And it's not clear if he's going to attend this WEF meeting in person or virtually. That his recent trip to DC was the first time he left Ukraine, the first time that we know about that he left Ukraine since Russia invaded. But it shows who Ukraine is going to be looking toward and who's going to be benefiting from rebuilding Ukraine after it's destroyed, after tons of people are killed. These Blackrock and the World Economic Forum and all the investors are going to make out on the reconstruction of the country. And in October, earlier, Zelensky, he's already asking for aid to start reconstruction projects. He says he wants 17 billion to begin some of them in 2023. But again, who knows how long this war is going to last, and realistically, what they can rebuild that might not just get destroyed again. All right, so the next article here, Gantz, the Israeli defense minister, the outgoing Israeli defense minister, he said that Israel might attack Iran in 2 or 3 years, and he said this while addressing a graduating class of Israeli Air Force pilots. He said, quote, Israel has significantly increased its preparedness in recent years and is preparing for the possibility of an attack on Iran. You may cross the sky to the east in 2 or 3 years and take part in an attack on nuclear sites in Iran, for which we are preparing, end quote. So this speech was likely Gantz's last one as defense minister, as Netanyahu's new government is going to be sworn in on Thursday. So he's, out the door. But the threats against Iran are going to continue. I mean, Netanyahu, his government is probably going to be even more hawkish on Iran than the current government of Lapid, and Gantz. And Netanyahu, as I went over yesterday, he tapped Hanegbi, a member of his Likud party. He's a veteran member of the Likud party, and he's also a huge Iran hawk, and he's going to lead Israel's National Security Council. And in recent years, he's repeatedly threatened Iran, including in November when he said Netanyahu would likely order attacks on the country if the U.S. doesn't reach a stricter nuclear deal. So other members on Wednesday during the ceremony for these Israeli pilots, these Israeli Air Force pilots, other members of the outgoing government addressed the ceremony, including Prime Minister Yair Lapid. He mentioned the recent U.S.-Israeli military drills that simulated attacks on Iran. These were held over the Mediterranean. He said, quote, 2 weeks ago, we held a large-scale joint exercise with the U.S. Air Force. The exercise, which simulated an attack thousands of kilometers from Israel's borders, was the first of a series of planned exercises in the near future, end quote. So Isaac Herzog, who's the Israeli president, he told the pilots that the Israeli Air Force could reach Iran. He said they could reach any site, near or far, including in Iran. So Israel frequently bombs Syria and they occasionally attack Lebanon. And Gantz alluded to the fact that these pilots will likely be targeting these countries. He said some of you may have to fly deep inside territory in Lebanon and Syria in the future. So no more Israeli threats against Iran. And the next one here, Iran says that the window is still open for nuclear deal talks, but the U.S. is preparing more sanctions. So Iran said this on Wednesday, but really, I mean, realistically, negotiations to revive the nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, this is the 2015 deal that Obama signed, that Trump left in 2018, that Biden said he would rejoin. I mean, there's realistically no chance that there's going to be talks anytime soon. But Iran's foreign ministers said that the window's still open, but warned that it won't be open forever. He said, quote, "If the opposite parties do not stop hypocrisy, especially the Americans, and the Westerners do not act realistically, it is not certain that the window that is open today will remain open tomorrow," end quote. So this came as the New York Times reported that the U.S. was looking to curtail the production of Iranian drones over Iran's support for Russia. Moscow is said to be using Iranian kamikaze drones to bomb Ukrainian infrastructure, although Tehran insists that it hasn't provided Russia with drones since the invasion of Ukraine. I'm not sure what the real story is there, but I know that the U.S. is also saying that Iran's going to sell ballistic missiles to Russia, which Iran and Russia deny. So who knows? But there is no doubt that Russia and Iran are increasing their cooperation, military cooperation as well, because they're facing similar pressure from the West. It's an alliance that the U.S. has built, by sanctioning both of these countries. Same thing with, Iran and Venezuela, Russia and China. You can't be surprised that these relationships are increasing. So, a National Security Council spokeswoman acknowledged in comments to the New York Times that the U.S. was looking to use sanctions against Iran's nuclear program. She said, quote, "We are looking at ways to target Iranian UAV production through sanctions, export controls, and talking to private companies whose parts have been used in the production," end quote. So the U.S. has also discussed the issue with Israel, which signals that the Biden administration may be considering covert action against Iran's drone production, as Israel has a history of sabotage operations inside the Islamic Republic. And that's not just me kind of assuming that. It's also the New York Times report said that, you know, that they could be considering some kind of covert operations. And the U.S. and Israel, they launched a pretty serious covert cyber attack against Iranian nuclear facilities years ago. I believe it was back in like 2010, known as Stuxnet, and that was a pretty serious cyber attack. So they have a history of cooperating on things like that, and Israel has attacked, from my understanding, Iranian military facilities, not just nuclear facilities, but also military facilities. And I should have put this in the article and looked it up, but I think there was some sort of drone attack on a warehouse, maybe where they made drones. I'm not sure though. But anyway, Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor, he held talks with high-level Israeli officials last week. And according to the White House, they discussed Iran's growing military relationship with Russia and including, the transfer of drones and things like that. So they're talking about it, the U.S. and Israel. And besides just these plans, the other sign that negotiations between the U.S. and Iran aren't going to happen is the fact that Biden recently said the JCPOA is dead. He said it in November, but the video just surfaced last week of him saying it. And since the talks fell apart in September, the U.S. has continued to increase sanctions on Iran, express support for the protesters inside the country, did those joint military drills with Israel simulating attacks on Iran. I mean, so they're just keep ramping up the tensions. And especially with this new Israeli government, and that's what this next article is about, but this isn't related to Iran. So Netanyahu's incoming Israeli government makes West Bank settlement expansion a top priority. So Netanyahu's new hardline government released a policy paper on Wednesday. Again, they're going to be sworn in on Thursday. And it puts the expansion of West Bank settlements as a top priority. So when it comes to Israel's occupation of the West Bank, there's a lot of settlements there that are considered illegal under international law and by most countries, except for the U.S., because Trump changed that policy. He changed it so the U.S. no longer views settlements as illegal. But for the Palestinians, and anyone that pays attention to the issue, the expansion of settlements as it's continued over the years is really just the slow de facto annexation of the West Bank. They're just slowly pushing the Palestinians out, destroying some, villages and building new Jewish settler homes. And the new government, so in the paper, they said that they promised to advance and develop settlements in all parts of Israel, including Judea and Samaria, which is the biblical name for the occupied West Bank. So Netanyahu wrote something similar on Twitter. He said that, quote, the Jewish people have an exclusive and unquestionable right to all areas of the land of Israel, end quote. And he said that his government will work to promote, in the same line. I should just read exactly what he said, um, just because it is a pretty bad sign for the Palestinians. And he wrote it in Hebrew. This is based on a Google translation, but uh, it's also very similar to what they wrote in this paper, the new government. He said, these are the basic lines of the national government headed by me. The Jewish people have an exclusive and unquestionable right to all areas of the land of Israel. The government will promote and develop settlement in all parts of the land of Israel, in the Galilee, the Negev, the Golan, Judea, and Samaria. So, yeah, again, it's just not looking good for the Palestinians. And under the coalition deal that he signed, Bezalel Smotrich, who leads the religious Zionism party, he's considered an extremist settler. He lives in a settlement, and he's going to be given vast powers over the West Bank. He's been appointed as the finance minister, but he has a second post as a minister, new position in the defense ministry, and he's expected to have the power over approving new settlements and the demolition of Palestinian homes and other structures. He wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal this week where he insisted that there would be no changing the political or legal status of the West Bank, but he has long called for the annexation of the entire territory. Netanyahu claimed in a recent interview that major decisions when it comes to the West Bank will be up to him, and his defense minister kind of denying that Smotrich is really going to have that much power. But even if the decisions are up to him, settlements are likely to expand rapidly as his previous government advanced plans for a record number of settlements in 2020. And the expansion of settlements in the West Bank is going to be viewed again by the Palestinians as the speeding up of de facto annexation. It's going to increase tensions in the occupied territory. The UN has said, 2022 has been one of the deadliest years for Palestinians in the West Bank. There's been a lot of violence, and the violence is expected to rise with this new hardline Israeli government. I've seen some people say they think that this could spark a third intifada. Things could get really bad. And yeah, it's just bad news. And it's not just on the settlement front. It's also, of course, with Iran. And this, Israel is probably going to be looking for more support from the U.S. as the tensions, get higher. And, the Biden administration is going to say that they're against settlements expansion, but I doubt they're really going to do much about it. One reason why Netanyahu was able to advance plans for so many settlements in 2020 was because Trump was one of the most pro-Israel presidents of all time, and that's saying a lot, and really let him get away with a lot. Netanyahu do really whatever he wanted to do. All right, so the last article in the news section, Turkey and Syria, their defense ministers, they held a meeting for the first time since 2011. So they held talks in Moscow, and this is a sign of thawing relations between Ankara and Damascus. The conversation between Turkish Turkey's defense minister and his Syrian counterpart is believed to be the first meeting of the two nations' defense ministers since 2011. Russia's defense ministry, they hosted the talks. It included Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister. They said that the talks focused on solutions to the crisis in Syria, refugee issue, and joint efforts to battle extremist groups inside Syria. So Turkey severed diplomatic relations with Damascus back in 2012 and backed the failed regime change effort against Assad, the Syrian president, by supporting anti-government fighters quite a bit. I mean, they've provided a lot of support to some of those groups on the ground in Syria. But now that it's clear that Assad is not going anywhere and Turkey has been focusing on Kurdish militants in northeast Syria, Ankara has been signaling that it wants a rapprochement with Damascus. Turkey's foreign minister revealed earlier this year that he briefly met with his Syrian counterpart in October of last year, of 2021. And that's the first known high-level meeting between the two governments since 2011. So, that's a long time. and considering that they're neighbors. And the Russian Defense Ministry said that the meeting was there's constructive dialogue. The Turkish Defense Ministry also described the talks as constructive, and this comes as Turkey launched major airstrikes against the U.S. backed SDF, which is the Kurdish militant group that the U.S. backs in northeast Syria. It allows the U.S. to occupy eastern Syria. And Turkey has blamed them for a bombing in Istanbul. The SDF denies that they had anything to do with it, but they've been trying to get the U.S. and Russia to convince the SDF to withdraw from towns near the Turkish border. They want a buffer zone between the Turkish border and where these Kurdish forces are. And the SDF has not been happy with the U.S.'s efforts to curtail Turkey's offensive, and they've actually asked Russia if they could broker talks with the Syrian government. And one possible solution for the tensions on the border would be for the Kurds to withdraw, and Syrian, government, probably Arab troops, could deploy to the border areas, giving uh, um, Turkey that buffer zone that they want. And I believe the SDF has suggested that they should be absorbed into the Syrian military. But this is never going to happen as long as the US is in the way. So we'll see what the SDF, maybe at some point they're going to get fed up enough with the US that they might try to make a deal with the Syrian government anyway. But who knows? We'll see how it shakes out. But it's just, you see what a big problem, the US presence in the region is. It goes against the whole narrative that if the U.S. withdraws from Syria, they would be abandoning the Kurds. When the SDF always says, whenever the U.S. talked about withdrawing under Trump, they said, "Oh, well, we can, have a rapprochement with Damascus. That's always an option for us," is how they put it once. That's it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Judge Nat, searching for monsters. Sort of about the history of U.S. foreign policy, and that famous quote from John Quincy Adams that America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. We have one from Ted Snyder about Biden saying the Iran deal is dead, but that he won't say the Iran deal is dead because in that video, when he said it was dead, somebody asked, can you just announce that the Iran deal is dead? And he said, well, it is dead, but I can't announce it. Well, they had a camera on him, so he has announced it. We have one from Covert Action magazine about Merkel, the former German chancellor, admitting that the Minsk Accords that were meant to end the war in the Donbass that started in 2014 were part of a scheme to buy time for Ukraine to prepare for war with Russia. She said that it was an attempt to give Ukraine time. And they mentioned how Petro Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine who came to power in snap elections after the 2014 coup, he said that something similar last year. He said that their goal was, by signing the Minsk, was to stop the threat or at least delay the war, to secure 8 years to restore economic growth and create more powerful armed forces. He didn't say that last year. I think he said it this past June. And then we have one from Kit Clarenberg about Twitter's collaboration with the U.S. military, info warfare, about those Twitter files over at the Cradle. So go check that out. And if you're interested in some of the Israeli government stuff, we have a ton of stuff lower in the page. These are all articles, from other sources, just news stories, less important than, the things that I write up that we put at the top of the page. But, it's a good resource for a lot of the, journalists and researchers who check antiwar.com every day. But we've had a lot of big Israel sections lately with the new government coming in, so you could go skim that. Because there's a lot to it. And one thing I haven't really talked about is how there's been a lot of people inside Israel, the Israeli military, I believe, and some people in the Air Force saying that this new Israeli government is bad. And, a lot of people inside Israel are worried about what's going to happen. But anyway, That's it for me for today. Go to antiwar.com/donate to give us a donation before the year ends so you could write it off for your 2022 taxes. Like and subscribe on YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble. If you listen audio, you could leave a review wherever you listen to it. Give a rating, do stuff like that. Share it with your friends and all that stuff. But that's it for me for today. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you tomorrow.